The outer edges of the Varith expanse were the kind of place that appeared on star maps only as a thin gray blur. Not empty, just avoided. The official explanation was simple. The region had no stable hyperlanes, very few resource-bearing systems, and stellar radiation patterns that made navigation irritatingly unpredictable. For most governments in the Galactic Accord, that was reason enough to route trade lanes somewhere else. But the real reason ships avoided the expanse had nothing to do with navigation charts. It had to do with history. No one talked about it openly because the Accord preferred a clean narrative about the past. Still, among explorers and long-haul crews, certain stories circulated quietly across docking bays and refueling stations. Stories about the war. 8 centuries ago, the Accord had fought a short, brutal conflict against a species that had grown inconvenient. The official records called the event the Pacification Campaign. The less official versions used a different word: extinction. The records said humanity had been eradicated completely. Their worlds sterilized, their fleets destroyed, their cities reduced to drifting clouds of metal and dust. There were no survivors. And yet, scattered across the outer arms of the galaxy were places like the Varith Expanse, quiet regions of space where military patrols never traveled and where long-range sensors were always slightly, inexplicably unreliable. Places the Accord preferred not to examine too closely. Which was exactly why the Corvani Salvage Consortium loved them. Salvage work depended on 2 things: abandoned wreckage and people who had forgotten where the wreckage was. The Expanse provided both in abundance. Drevik Su leaned forward in his command chair as the survey data scrolled across the bridge display of the Reckless Ambition. Drevik had spent most of his life chasing debris fields across forgotten systems. He was not a romantic man, and he did not care about history beyond how much profit it could produce. But the sensor readings in front of him were interesting. Very interesting. "Run the mass calculation again," he said. The ship's scanner operator, a narrow-faced Corvani named Cell, frowned at her console. "I already did." "Do it again." Cell sighed but complied. A moment later the display updated. "Mass estimate: 4.8 million tons. Drevik raised an eyebrow. "That's not an asteroid," Cell muttered. "No," Drevik agreed. "It isn't." The object floated roughly 500,000 kilometers ahead of them, drifting slowly in the silent darkness between 2 dim red stars. It emitted no beacon signal, no active energy signature, and no response to standard identification pings. Which meant one thing: it was dead. Dead ships were valuable. Drevik tapped the edge of the console thoughtfully. "How old is the probe data again?" 3 years, Cell said. It logged the mass reading and then stopped transmitting. "Mechanical failure?" "Probably." Drevik nodded slowly. "Bring us closer." The Reckless Ambition eased forward, maneuvering thrusters firing in short, careful bursts. The ship was not large by military standards, barely 200 meters from nose to engine cluster, but in salvage work, size was less important than flexibility. And patience. 10 minutes later the object ahead began resolving into something with shape. Cell leaned forward. "That's not rock." "No," Drevik said quietly. The thing drifting in the expanse was unmistakably artificial. A ship. A very large one. Even from a distance it was obvious the vessel had not been built by any modern Accord civilization. Current warships were sleek and narrow, designed for efficiency and minimal mass. Every major species in the Accord shared the same basic design philosophy. Precision. Elegance. This ship had none of those qualities. Its hull was thick and brutal, layered with armored plating that looked more like fortress walls than spacecraft construction. Rows of weapon ports ran along its surface in dense overlapping patterns. It looked less like a vehicle and more like something designed to survive the end of the universe. Cell whistled softly. "That's a warship." "Yes," Drevik said. "But whose?" No one on the bridge answered. The Reckless Ambition drifted closer, its lights sweeping across the blackened surface of the ancient vessel. Time had not been gentle. Large sections of the hull were scorched almost glassy, as if the ship had once been exposed to unimaginable heat. Meteor impacts had peppered the armor with thousands of tiny craters. And yet the structure itself remained intact. Perfectly intact. Which was strange. Warships usually died violently. This one looked like it had simply stopped. Drevik studied the sensor display again. No active reactor, he said. No shield residue, Cell added. No signal. Cold as vacuum. Drevik smiled faintly. Perfect. Salvage from an old military wreck could fund a consortium operation for years. Reactor cores alone were worth a fortune. The ship rotated slowly as the reckless ambition moved alongside it. Up close, the scale became almost absurd. Their vessel looked like a shuttle drifting beside a city. Cell's voice dropped. Captain, look at that. Drevik followed her gaze toward the midsection of the ancient ship. There, half buried beneath centuries of micrometeor damage, were faint markings etched into the armor plating. Symbols. Old ones. The reckless ambition carried a historian among its hired specialists. A small gray-haired man named Reth Cavil whose entire career revolved around studying extinct languages. Drevik turned toward the rear of the bridge. Reth, he called. The historian shuffled forward, adjusting the data lens over his left eye. Yes. Drevik pointed to the markings. Recognize that script? Reth studied the symbols in silence for a long moment. Then another. The bridge grew very quiet. Finally Reth spoke. His voice sounded suddenly much older. Yes. Drevik waited. What is it? Reth swallowed. That, he said slowly, is human writing. The silence that followed was absolute. Cell blinked. Human. Drevik frowned. That's impossible. Reth nodded faintly. Yes, he said. That's what worries me. For several seconds after Reth spoke, no one on the bridge of the reckless ambition moved. Human. The word carried an uncomfortable weight in the modern galaxy. It was not forbidden, exactly, but it was rarely used outside academic circles. Most species preferred the official term from the Accord historical archives. The extinct civilization. Drevik finally broke the silence. That's not funny. Reth didn't smile. It wasn't meant to be. Cell turned her chair toward the historian, her four eyes narrowing slightly. You're sure? Reth activated his archive reader and began scrolling through several reference databases. The display filled with comparison symbols and faded historical scans. I'm not guessing, he said quietly. These are Terran designation marks. Early expansion era. Very old. How old? Drevik asked. Reth hesitated. Before the culling. That made the air on the bridge feel colder. Everyone in the Accord learned about the culling in school. 8 centuries ago, the largest powers in the galaxy had fought a war against humanity. The official version described it as a necessary defensive action against an aggressively expanding civilization. The war had ended quickly. Humanity had been wiped out. At least that was what the record said. Cell looked back at the enormous vessel drifting beside them. If this is human, she said slowly, then the records are wrong. Not necessarily, Drevik replied. He leaned back in his chair, studying the scarred black hull. Ships drift. Debris spreads. Wrecks get lost. He pointed toward the ancient armor plating. This thing could have been floating here since the war. Reth shook his head. No. Drevik glanced at him. What do you mean, no? Reth gestured toward the sensor display. Look at the debris patterns. Cell zoomed the scanner feed closer. Tiny fragments of dust and ice drifted lazily around the massive hull in thin curved streams. Reth tapped the screen. Those microdebris trails tell us how long an object has been stationary in space. The particles settle into very slow orbital paths. He enlarged a section of the display. These patterns take centuries to form. How many centuries? Drevik asked. Reth looked at him. About 8. The bridge went silent again. Cell exhaled softly. That lines up with the end of the war. Yes, Reth said. Drevik frowned. So the ship's been dead here since humanity went extinct. That's what it looks like. Cell leaned forward again, curiosity overcoming her discomfort. If that's true, We just found the biggest historical artifact in the galaxy. Drevik's smile returned. And possibly the most profitable. Reth gave him a sharp look. This isn't scrap metal. Everything is scrap metal if no one owns it anymore. Reth turned back toward the observation window, staring at the massive vessel with growing unease. You don't understand. Then explain it. Reth pointed to the hull. That design. Cell zoomed the camera feed across the ship's surface. Hundreds of recessed weapon ports line the armor in carefully spaced rows. Modern warships are designed for speed and maneuverability, Reth said. They rely on coordinated fleet tactics. He tapped the screen again. Human warships didn't. Drevik raised an eyebrow. What did they rely on? Reth answered without looking away from the display. Endurance. The camera drifted past the midsection of the ancient vessel, revealing more armor plating layered in thick overlapping segments. This ship was built to survive being outnumbered, Reth continued. Humans expected to fight entire fleets alone. Cell stared at the weapon ports. There must be hundreds. Probably more. Drevik's interest sharpened. A warship like this would have multiple reactor cores. Yes. And fabrication systems. Yes. And enough salvageable technology to buy me 3 new fleets. Reth turned to him slowly. If that ship is human, it isn't just salvage. What else would it be? Reth hesitated. Then he said the words very carefully. It could be a stasis vessel. Drevik frowned. What? A last resort strategy. Reth activated another section of his archive database. During the final years of the war, human intelligence believed the coalition might attempt total extermination. There were rumors of contingency plans. What kind of plans? Cell asked. Reth looked back at the ship. Ships designed to disappear. Drevik crossed his arms. You're saying humans hid survivors? It's possible. Cell looked at the sensor readings again. The ship shows no active life signs. Reth nodded. That doesn't mean much. Why not? Cryogenic stasis systems operate at extremely low energy levels. Passive scans often miss them. Drevik leaned forward again. You're suggesting that thing might still have people inside. Reth didn't answer. He didn't need to. The thought hung in the air between them. Cell finally spoke. If that's true. She looked back at the enormous ship. Then we just found 40,000-year-old ghosts. Drevik stood up. Only one way to know. Reth turned sharply. You're not seriously thinking about boarding it. Drevik gave him a flat look. That ship is worth more than every salvage contract we've ever taken combined. It's also a potential military relic from an extinction war. Yes. And you still want to go inside? Drevik shrugged. It's been sitting here for 800 years without doing anything. He turned toward the crew. Prep boarding gear. Cell hesitated. Captain. Yes. What if the historian's right? Drevik smiled slightly. Then we'll be the first people in 8 centuries to meet a human. He paused. And think about how much someone would pay for that story. Outside the observation window, the ancient ship rotated slowly in the silent darkness. Its scarred hull absorbed the starlight without reflection, like a black monument buried in time. Drevik pointed toward the nearest maintenance hatch. Bring us alongside. The reckless ambition's thrusters fired gently as the small salvage vessel began maneuvering toward the giant human warship. Behind them, the quiet emptiness of the Verith expanse watched without comment. The docking procedure took almost 2 hours. The ancient warship had no active guidance systems, no responding beacon, and no functional port controls. Whatever power once ran the vessel had long since gone silent, which meant the crew of the reckless ambition had to improvise. A maintenance panel near the aft section of the ship's hull looked promising. It was partially protected by a thick ridge of armor, which meant it had survived most of the micrometeor damage. Drevik approved the approach. The salvage vessel eased carefully against the enormous hull, magnetic clamps locking onto the scorched armor with a heavy metallic thunk. Outside the airlock, Torvin and 4 crew members prepared their suits. Torvin was the salvage chief, A thick-shouldered Corvani whose calm temperament had gotten the crew out of more bad situations than anyone could count. He checked the seal on his helmet and glanced toward Reth. "You coming?" Reth hesitated. Historians were not usually part of boarding teams. But this was not a normal wreck. "Yes," he said finally. "If that ship really is human, I should see it myself." Torvin nodded once. The outer airlock opened. Black space swallowed the team immediately. They drifted across the short distance between the two ships, boots magnetizing to the massive armor plating of the ancient vessel. Up close, the scale of the ship became overwhelming. Each section of the hull was thicker than the walls of the reckless Ambition. The armor plating overlapped in heavy segments like the scales of some enormous mechanical creature. Torvin ran a gloved hand across the surface. This thing could take a direct plasma strike. Reth studied the markings near the maintenance panel. They expected it to. Torvin activated his cutter. "Let's see what they left inside." The cutting torch flared bright white against the dark metal. Sparks drifted slowly into the vacuum as the circular outline of the hatch separated from the surrounding plating. 10 minutes later, the panel dropped inward. Torvin aimed his helmet light into the opening. "Atmosphere?" Cell's voice crackled over the comm. "Negative. Vacuum inside." "Figures." Torvin pushed himself forward and floated through the opening. The others followed. Inside, the corridor was completely dark. Their helmet lamps cut narrow tunnels of light through the blackness, revealing smooth metal walls and sealed equipment lockers that looked strangely untouched. Torvin activated his suit magnetics and dropped to the floor. The others followed with soft metallic thuds. For a moment no one spoke. The silence inside the ship felt different from the silence of space. It felt contained. Reth slowly turned in a circle, his light sweeping across the corridor. "No debris," he murmured. Torvin noticed the same thing. Not even dust. Battle wrecks always told a story. Broken panels. Melted wiring. Shrapnel scars. Floating fragments of equipment. This corridor showed none of that. Everything was in place. Every panel sealed. Every locker closed. It looked less like a dead warship and more like a ship whose crew had stepped out for a moment. Torvin moved forward carefully. "Stay sharp." The team advanced deeper into the vessel. Their lights illuminated long corridors lined with identical doors and equipment racks. Every system looked orderly, almost meticulously maintained. After several minutes, Reth spoke again. "This ship didn't die in battle." Torvin glanced back. "What makes you say that?" "There's no damage inside." They passed through a large pressure door that Torvin had to manually crank open. Beyond it, the corridor widened. Then the team turned a corner and stopped. The hallway ahead stretched farther than their lights could reach. Both walls were lined with large vertical structures stacked in perfect rows from floor to ceiling. Torvin stepped forward slowly. "What are those?" Reth moved closer. His helmet light swept across the nearest structure. A transparent panel revealed the shape inside. A human body. Reth froze. Torvin stared. There were hundreds of them. The corridor was filled with hibernation pods. Each one sealed. Each one dark. Each one holding a motionless human figure suspended in frozen stasis. Torvin's voice came out quieter than he intended. "How many?" Cell's voice came over the comm. "Give me dimensions." Torvin transmitted the corridor scan. Several seconds passed. Then Cell responded. "Rough estimate, 300 pods in that corridor alone." Torvin slowly turned his helmet light down the hallway. It continued for what looked like hundreds of meters. Reth whispered, "This isn't the only one." Torvin checked his scanner. The device struggled in the low-power environment, but faint structural outlines appeared. Dozens of parallel corridors ran through the midsection of the ship. Each one identical. Each one filled with pods. Cell's voice returned, softer now. "If the whole midsection is configured like that..." She paused. "We're looking at tens of thousands of stasis units." No one spoke. The lights from their helmets reflected across the glass surfaces of the pods, revealing silent human faces locked in frozen sleep. Women. Young adults barely older than teenagers. all preserved exactly as they had been 8 centuries ago. Torvin finally forced himself to move closer to the nearest pod. Are they alive? Reth shook his head slowly. I don't know. The materials specialist, Kara, stepped forward with her scanner. Move aside. She pressed the device against the pod's surface and ran a passive biological scan. The scanner beeped. She frowned. Then she ran it again. Torvin watched her. Well? Kara looked up. Her voice sounded almost disbelieving. They're not dead. The corridor fell completely silent. Torvin stared at the pod again. The human inside looked peaceful. Almost like they were simply sleeping. How is that possible? Someone whispered. Reth answered. Cryogenic suspension. He gestured down the endless corridor of pods. This ship wasn't fleeing the war. He looked back toward the direction they had entered. It was waiting. Torvin swallowed. Then he spoke into the comm. Captain, you might want to see this. Back on the reckless ambition, Drevik leaned forward. What did you find? Torvin hesitated. Then he said the words slowly. We found the crew. There was a pause. How many? Torvin turned his helmet light down the corridor again. Glass pods reflected the beam like endless mirrors. I don't know, he said. But it looks like an entire army. And somewhere deep inside the ancient ship, buried beneath 8 centuries of silence, a system indicator flickered faintly to life. The discovery of the pods changed the mood immediately. Before, the boarding operation had felt like routine salvage work. Unusual, perhaps, but still just another forgotten wreck drifting in the dark. Now the ship felt different. Alive. Torvin ordered 2 crew members to remain in the hibernation corridor while the rest of the team moved deeper into the vessel. Don't touch anything, he told them. The 2 guards nodded nervously, positioning themselves near the entrance of the pod hull. Their helmet lights stretched down the endless rows of silent sleepers. Behind them, Torvin led the rest of the team forward. Their scanner readings indicated that the ship's command core lay somewhere above them near the central structure of the vessel. It took nearly an hour to reach it. The interior layout of the ship was confusing at first, long corridors intersecting with mechanical bays and sealed pressure doors that had to be manually forced open. But one thing remained constant. The ship was intact. Not pristine, but preserved. Even after 800 years, nothing inside looked looted or destroyed. Equipment sat exactly where it had been left. Tools were stored neatly in racks. Storage containers remained sealed. The crew had not abandoned the ship in panic. They had prepared it. Eventually the corridor opened into a wide circular chamber. Torvin stepped through the doorway and stopped. This has to be it. The command core rose 3 stories high, filled with dark consoles and suspended control platforms that curved around a central command chair. Dust drifted lazily in the faint glow of their helmet lights. Most of the systems were clearly offline, but one console still showed a faint pulse of light. Reth moved toward it slowly. How is that still powered? Torvin checked the scanner. Emergency battery reserves, he said. Barely anything left. The glow from the console flickered weakly. Reth brushed his hand across the surface. A small display came to life. For a moment nothing happened. Then the screen brightened. A human woman appeared. She wore a dark uniform with a small insignia on the collar, an emblem none of them recognized. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her expression was calm. Not frightened. Not angry. Just composed. The recording began to play. If you have found this vessel, the woman said, you have made a serious mistake. Her voice was steady, measured. Torvin glanced at the others. No one moved. Leave immediately, the woman continued. Do not attempt to access any ship systems. Do not attempt to open the hibernation units. Do not remove any component from this vessel. She paused briefly. The silence in the command chamber seemed to deepen. This is the only warning you will receive. The message continued. Whatever you came here looking for, it is not worth what will happen if you stay. The recording ended. Then it began again. If you have found this vessel. Torvin watched the loop repeat twice. The woman's tone never changed. She sounded less like someone threatening violence and more like someone stating an unavoidable fact. Finally, Torvin turned away from the screen. Reth was staring at the recording as if it had personally insulted him. "She knew someone would find it," he said. "Of course she did," Torvin replied. "Ships like this don't just wander into dead space by accident." Reth looked back at the display. That wasn't a distress message. No. It was a warning. Torvin shrugged. 800 years ago. He activated his comm. "Captain, you need to hear this." Drevik's voice came through the channel. "What did you find?" Torvin transmitted the recording. There was a pause while Drevik watched it from the bridge of the Reckless Ambition. Then Drevik spoke again. "That's it. That's it." Another pause. "So an old message told us to leave." "Yes." "And?" Torvin hesitated. It sounded serious. Drevik chuckled faintly. "Torvin, that message has been looping for 8 centuries. He tapped something on his console. "If the ship could actually do anything about us being here, it would have done it by now." Torvin looked around the silent command chamber. The ship felt watchful. Still waiting. He lowered his voice slightly. "I don't like it." "Fortunately," Drevik replied, "I don't pay you to like things." The captain's tone hardened. "That ship's reactor core alone is worth enough to fund the consortium for the next 50 years. Torvin sighed. "What do you want us to do?" "Start extraction." Reth turned sharply. "You can't be serious." Drevik ignored him. "There's a reactor housing somewhere near the midsection. Locate it and begin disassembly." Torvin glanced once more at the looping message on the console. The human woman was speaking again. "This is the only warning you will receive." Torvin keyed his comm. "You heard the captain." He turned toward the exit. "Let's find that reactor." Reth remained standing near the console. "You're making a mistake." Torvin paused in the doorway. "Maybe." Then he left. Reth looked back at the screen. The woman's calm eyes stared forward from across 8 centuries of silence. "Leave now," she said again. Reth whispered to the empty command room. "I think we should have listened." Deep in the lower decks of the ship, cutting torches began slicing through the protective casing around the ancient reactor housing. 40 minutes later, every light on the ship came on. Not gradually. Not flickering. All at once. Bright white illumination flooded every corridor and chamber simultaneously, as if the ship had simply decided the darkness had lasted long enough. Across the vessel, startled voices filled the salvage team's comm channels. "Torvin! The lights just..." Something powered up. Back in the command core, Reth stared at the console. The recording had disappeared. A new message filled the display. "Dormancy broken. Priority Omega sequence initiated." Reth felt the cold certainty settle in his stomach. Behind him, somewhere deep within the ship, a sound rolled through the hull. Not mechanical. Not violent. Just a long, quiet wave of soft metallic clicks. Like thousands of locks opening at the same time. The first thing Admiral Sarif Voss heard was the hum of the ship. It was a sound she knew better than her own heartbeat. A deep, steady vibration moving through the metal structure around her. The unmistakable sound of a starship whose systems were awake and running. For a moment, her mind tried to fit the sound into something familiar. She was in her bunk. The ship was preparing for a maneuver. Another routine cycle. Then the cold hit. It crept slowly through her body like needles under her skin. Her lungs burned as she drew a breath that felt strangely difficult. That was when memory returned. Stasis. Her eyes opened. Mist curled through the air around her face as the cryogenic seals disengaged with a soft hiss. Frost cracked along the surface of the pod as warm air flooded the chamber for the first time in centuries. Voss sat up slowly. Her muscles protested the movement immediately. 800 years of suspended sleep did not end gently. For a moment she simply sat there, breathing. The pod around her unfolded mechanically, panels sliding open to release her. The air tasted unfamiliar. She swung her legs over the edge and stood. The room swayed slightly as her balance recalibrated. Around her, dozens of other pods were opening. Cold vapor spilled across the floor as human bodies stirred back into life. Some coughed violently. Others simply sat upright in stunned silence. Everywhere there was the quiet sound of breathing. Real breathing. Voss steadied herself against the side of her pod. "Status," she said hoarsely. Her voice sounded rough, as if it had not been used in a very long time. A moment later the ship answered. "Admiral Voss," the voice said calmly. "I am pleased to confirm successful reactivation." Voss closed her eyes briefly. The ship's artificial intelligence responded immediately. "Yes, Admiral." The voice sounded exactly as it had before the war, composed, precise, and strangely reassuring. "Report." "All primary systems operational," replied. "Reactor output stable. Structural integrity 94%. Voss flexed her fingers slowly. "And the crew?" "Stasis survival rate currently estimated at 91%. Voss absorbed the number. That meant losses. Hundreds of them. Perhaps more. But after 8 centuries in stasis, it was better than anyone had expected. "Damage from the battle?" she asked. "Mostly repaired," said. "Fabrication systems have been operating continuously during dormancy." Voss nodded faintly. The ship had taken terrible damage during the Battle of Callum Station. That was the last thing she remembered clearly. Human fleets burning across 3 star systems. Coalition armadas surrounding them. The order to activate the final contingency. She looked around the awakening chamber. Soldiers were climbing from their pods one by one, their movements stiff but purposeful. They were not panicking. Humans rarely did. "Tatu," she said. There was a brief pause. 812 years, replied. The words hung quietly in the air. Voss did not react immediately. She had expected something like that. Hearing the number made it real. "Understood," she said finally. Then she asked the question that mattered. "What woke us?" Answered without hesitation. "External interference with reactor containment systems." Voss frowned slightly. "Explain." "We have visitors aboard the ship." Voss turned her head slowly. "What kind of visitors?" "Non-human salvage personnel," said. "They began dismantling the auxiliary reactor housing approximately 40 minutes ago." Voss blinked once. "Salvagers?" "Yes, Admiral." She considered that information for exactly 2 seconds. "Casualties?" "None." "Hostile intent?" "Uncertain." Voss stepped away from the pod. Her legs were steadier now. "Where are they?" "Several groups inside the ship," said. "One currently located in the command core." Voss began walking. The corridor outside the stasis chamber was already filling with soldiers regaining their footing. Some leaned against the walls while their bodies adjusted to gravity again. Others were already moving toward their assigned stations. 8 centuries had not erased training. "Command core," Voss said. "Route displayed," replied. It took 11 minutes to reach it. The journey felt longer. Her body still resisted movement, and the corridors were crowded with newly awakened crew members moving slowly but deliberately through the ship. When she reached the command chamber doorway, she stopped. Inside, 11 alien figures stood clustered near the far wall. They froze the moment they saw her. For a moment no one spoke. The salvagers looked small. Most non-human species did. Their skin was gray-brown, their eyes wide and dark, their posture tense with uncertainty. One of them, a broad-shouldered individual who looked like the group's leader, stepped forward hesitantly. Voss studied him calmly. "You boarded my ship," she said. The alien swallowed. "Yes." His voice trembled slightly. "We believed it was abandoned." Voss walked past him and moved toward the command console. "Clearly." She placed her hand on the surface. The displays flared to life instantly. "Yes, Admiral. Current galactic year." The alien salvage captain answered instead. 812 years after the culling. The word stopped her hand. She turned slowly. "The what?" The salvage captain hesitated. "The culling." Voss stared at him. "Explain." The alien looked extremely uncomfortable. "Our history records state that humanity was eliminated during the Accord pacification campaign." Voss felt something cold and heavy settle into place inside her chest. Eliminated. Yes. How? The alien shifted uneasily. The official record describes it as a defensive action against an expansionist species. Silence filled the command chamber. Behind Voss, several of her officers had arrived quietly. None of them spoke. The alien continued reluctantly. It is taught that the campaign resulted in the extinction of humanity. Voss processed the information without changing her expression. 8 billion people. Entire planetary systems. Cities. Families. Children. Gone. Rewritten as a historical footnote. She stood quietly for several seconds. Then she asked one final question. Is humanity remembered as an enemy? The alien nodded. Yes. Voss turned back to the console. Yes, Admiral. Run a full weapons diagnostic. There was a brief pause. Already in progress, the AI replied. Preliminary results are promising. Voss nodded once. Good. She looked back at the salvage crew. You will not be harmed, she said calmly. You will remain aboard until I determine whether your presence represents a threat. The alien leader nodded quickly. Yes. Of course. Voss returned her attention to the console. Next question, she said. What political structure governs the galaxy now? The alien hesitated. The Galactic Accord. Voss considered the name. Then I believe, she said quietly, the Galactic Accord and I are about to have a conversation. Far below them, in the long corridors filled with hibernation pods, more humans were waking. And across the ancient ship, systems that had slept for 8 centuries continued coming online. The Remembrance of Ruin was awake. For the next 6 hours, Admiral Sarif Voss did not leave the command deck. The ancient warship, Remembrance of Ruin, had fully awakened now. Across the vessel, lights burned bright in corridors that had not seen illumination in 8 centuries. Engineering crews moved through reactor chambers, verifying systems that had kept themselves alive through centuries of automated repair cycles. Medical officers worked in the stasis bays, assisting thousands of humans as they emerged from cryogenic suspension. Some woke confused. Some woke crying. Some woke silently, staring at the ceiling as the reality of 800 lost years settled slowly into their minds. But none panicked. They had known the plan before they entered the pods. Humanity had always prepared for the worst. On the command deck, Voss studied the galaxy. The salvage crew had provided everything they knew: star charts, political structures, trade routes, military power distributions. It was not much, but it was enough for the ship's intelligence systems to begin building a model. The display in front of her showed a star map she barely recognized. Human territory was gone. Entire clusters of systems once claimed by the Terran Republic now carried new names, new flags, new owners. The old borders had been erased completely. 8 centuries of history had rewritten the map. Voss said quietly. Yes, Admiral. Estimated strength of the current Galactic Accord fleet. The AI processed the salvage data for several seconds. Available records suggest approximately 60,000 operational warships distributed across multiple member species. Voss nodded slowly. And technological parity? There was a pause. Uncertain, replied. However, based on sensor readings of the salvage vessel and their equipment, current Accord technology appears approximately 2 centuries behind late-war Terran military development. Voss folded her arms. Expected. The war had forced humanity to innovate quickly. When your entire species faced extermination, progress accelerated. 60,000 ships was a significant force. Even for them. She studied the map again. Do they know we exist? Unlikely, answered. The salvage crew appears genuinely surprised by our presence. Good. Voss turned toward the observation window. Beyond the glass, the small salvage ship floated nearby, still magnetically attached to the hull of the Remembrance of Ruin. Inside it, the crew waited nervously. They had already realized they were no longer in control of the situation. Yes, Admiral. Status of the secondary stasis bays. Approximately 42,000 survivors successfully revived so far, the AI replied. Revival operations continuing. Voss closed her eyes briefly. 42,000. Out of a civilization that once numbered in the billions. The silence of extinction pressed against the edges of her thoughts. She pushed it aside. Grief could come later. Right now there was work to do. Engineering status. All weapon systems operational, M said. Fabrication arrays fully functional. Ammunition reserves rebuilding continuously. Voss glanced back at the tactical display. And the drive. FTL systems fully operational. The Remembrance of Ruin had been one of the last ships constructed before the fall. It had not been designed to run. It had been designed to survive. She turned back to the salvage crew. Their leader, the one named Torvin, stood at the edge of the command chamber under guard. He had been surprisingly cooperative, mostly because he understood the alternative. Torvin, Voss said. The alien stepped forward cautiously. Yes. You mentioned a political entity called the Galactic Accord. Yes. Where is its central authority located? Torvin hesitated. The Accord Council meets on Astra Prime. Voss looked at the star map. The system appeared immediately. It sat near the center of the current galactic political structure. How far? 4 weeks by standard hyperlane travel, Torvin replied. Voss considered that. Yes. Direct jump capability? Possible, the AI said. Estimated travel time, 4 hours. Torvin's eyes widened. That's impossible. Voss ignored him. Do they know the truth about the war? She asked. Torvin looked uncomfortable. The official history says humanity was destroyed because it became too dangerous. Voss nodded. That is not the same as the truth. No. Torvin hesitated. What actually happened? Voss studied him. You said the campaign was called the culling. Yes. That word is accurate, she said. Torvin blinked. What? Voss turned back toward the stars. The Accord didn't defeat humanity in battle, she said calmly. They decided we were inconvenient. Torvin said nothing. Voss continued. They united long enough to destroy our infrastructure, collapse our trade networks, and isolate our worlds. She gestured toward the ship around them. This vessel was one of the last contingency projects. Torvin frowned. A survival ship. Yes. Why hide instead of fighting? Voss finally looked back at him. Because we had already lost the war. Torvin swallowed. So you ran? No, Voss said quietly. We prepared. She stepped closer to the command console. Yes, Admiral. Prepare a transmission. Destination? Voss looked at the star map again. The glowing symbol marking Astra Prime pulsed quietly. The Galactic Accord Council. Torvin stared at her. You're contacting them? Yes. That's incredibly dangerous. Voss's expression did not change. It's necessary. She began dictating the message. This is Admiral Sarif Voss of the Terran Defense Fleet. Torvin felt the air in the command chamber grow very still. Voss continued speaking calmly. To the leadership of the Galactic Accord. There has been a misunderstanding in your historical records. She paused briefly, then finished the transmission. Humanity did not go extinct. Torvin watched her. What happens now? Voss gave the faintest hint of a smile. That depends entirely, she said, on how the Accord chooses to respond. Outside the observation window, the ancient warship slowly rotated in the darkness. Its weapons systems were fully charged. Its crew was awake. And for the first time in 8 centuries, humanity had announced its return. The message reached Astra Prime in under 30 seconds. For a moment, no one on the Accord Council believed it was real. The council chamber was a vast circular hall suspended above the oceans of the planet, its transparent walls revealing the glowing curve of the world below. Representatives from more than 80 species filled the chamber's curved tiers. At the center of the room, a projection flickered into existence. The recorded message from Admiral Sarif Voss played again. This is Admiral Sarif Voss of the Terran Defense Fleet. The words echoed softly across the chamber. There has been a misunderstanding in your historical records. Humanity did not go extinct. Silence followed. Then the room erupted. That is impossible. Some kind of pirate transmission. Forgery. Human language databases are still archived. Someone could replicate them. Trace the origin. Council technicians scrambled across their consoles. A few seconds later, the chief analyst raised his head slowly. We did. And? The analyst swallowed. The signal originated from the Vareth expanse. The room went quiet again. That region of space was rarely mentioned inside the council chamber. Everyone knew why. Confirm the coordinates, one counselor demanded. They match, the analyst said. Another council member leaned forward. The expanse contains no active civilizations. That is correct. No major infrastructure. Correct. Then what transmitted the message? The analyst hesitated. We detected a large vessel. How large? Extremely large. The chamber murmured again. The council chair raised a hand for silence. Send a diplomatic patrol, she ordered. If this is a hoax, we will confirm it. And if it is not? Someone asked quietly. The chair did not answer. For hours later, the Remembrance of Ruin was no longer alone in the Vareth expanse. 12 ships dropped out of hyperspace 200,000 kilometers away. They were sleek vessels, modern Accord patrol cruisers, built for speed and coordination rather than brute force. Their commander, Fleet Captain Ivar Keth, studied the tactical display carefully. Sensor confirmation, he said. His officer nodded. One unidentified vessel present. Energy signature? High. How high? The officer hesitated. Very high. Keth leaned forward. The ship appeared on the screen. It dwarfed his entire formation. The Remembrance of Ruin floated silently in the dark, its massive armored hull absorbing the starlight like a shadow carved from metal. For several seconds Keth simply stared. Open a channel. The transmission went out. Unidentified vessel, Keth said calmly. This is Fleet Captain Ivar Keth of the Galactic Accord Patrol Group. You are operating in restricted space. Identify yourself and state your intentions. On the bridge of the Remembrance of Ruin, Admiral Voss listened to the message without reacting. Yes, Admiral. Prepare response. The channel opened automatically. This is Admiral Sarif Voss of the Terran Defense Fleet. The patrol ships went silent. Even across the vast distance, Keth could feel the tension spreading through his bridge crew. You received my earlier message, Voss continued. Keth replied carefully. We received a transmission claiming to be from humanity. Yes. And you are confirming that claim? I am. Keth studied the tactical display again. If this was a hoax, it was an extremely elaborate one. The ship's energy readings alone were unlike anything in the modern Accord fleet. He decided to push harder. Admiral Voss, he said, humanity was declared extinct 8 centuries ago. Yes. And you expect us to believe that a single warship survived that conflict? No. Voss's answer was immediate. I expect you to believe the evidence in front of you. Keth glanced at the sensor data again. It was difficult to argue with. The council had given him specific instructions. If you are indeed a Terran vessel, he said, you will submit to Accord authority immediately. On the Remembrance of Ruin, several officers exchanged quiet looks. Voss did not. There is no Accord authority here, she said calmly. Keth's tone hardened. You are inside Accord territory. Voss's voice remained completely steady. Incorrect. She paused. This region was Terran space long before the Accord existed. The patrol bridge fell silent. Keth took a breath. You are in violation of interstellar law. Voss tilted her head slightly. Fleet Captain, she said, you are currently commanding 12 ships. Yes. My vessel was designed to fight fleets. The statement hung quietly in the channel. Keth felt a ripple of unease move through his bridge. That sounds like a threat. No, Voss replied. It is context. She continued. I did not contact your government to start a war. Then why did you? To correct the historical record. Keth frowned. That will be decided by the council. I disagree. Keth felt his patience slipping. Admiral Voss, I am giving you one opportunity to power down your weapons and prepare to be escorted to Astra Prime. Voss considered that for exactly 2 seconds. No. Keth leaned forward. You are refusing lawful orders. Yes. And if we enforce them? Voss's voice did not change. Then we will demonstrate why the Accord spent 8 centuries hoping humanity was truly gone. The patrol bridge erupted in activity. Energy spike. Multiple weapon systems activating. Keth clenched the edge of his console. Battle stations. The 12 patrol cruisers spread into combat formation. Targeting systems locked onto the massive Terran vessel. Keth spoke quickly. Final warning, Admiral. Stand down. Voss looked at the tactical display. 12 ships. Modern. Predictable. Yes, Admiral. Disable them. Understood. Outside the massive hull of the Remembrance of Ruin, weapon ports opened across the ship's armored surface. Dozens. Hundreds. The patrol fleet had time to fire exactly 1 volley. Then the Terran ship answered. Precision beams struck the first cruiser's engines, shutting them down instantly. 2 more shots severed the weapons arrays of another vessel. A third cruiser lost its navigation core. The battle lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, all 12 Accord ships drifted powerless in space. Not one had been destroyed, but none could fight. On the patrol flagship, Captain Keth stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. Every system that mattered was offline. Weapons, engines, targeting, all disabled. Not destroyed. Just removed from the fight. A moment later Voss's voice returned to the channel. Fleet Captain. Keth swallowed. Yes. I believe that demonstration was sufficient. He stared at the massive Terran ship. What do you want? Voss answered simply. To speak with your government. The patrol ships drifted helplessly in the darkness. And for the first time in 800 years, the galaxy had just seen what a human warship could do. The defeat of the 12 patrol cruisers reached Astra Prime before the disabled ships had even finished drifting to a stop. Inside the Accord Council chamber, the reaction was immediate. Confusion. The tactical recording played across the central projection field again and again. A single Terran vessel. 12 modern patrol ships. For minutes. Every Accord ship disabled with surgical precision. No explosions. No destroyed vessels. Just systems going dark one after another. The silence in the chamber felt heavier each time the recording ended. Counselor Threven of the Lithari leaned forward slowly. That was not an attack. Another council member turned toward him. What? Threven pointed at the projection. If that ship intended to destroy the patrol group, it would have. The recording rewound again. The Terran beams struck engines, weapons mounts, and targeting arrays with impossible accuracy. Never the reactor. Never the crew compartments. Never the life support systems. It was not a massacre. It was a demonstration. A much older counselor spoke quietly. I remember something from the archives. The room turned toward her. What? She hesitated. During the final years of the human war, our fleets stopped engaging Terran vessels one-on-one. Why? Because a single human ship could sometimes destroy an entire squadron. The council chamber fell silent. The chairwoman finally spoke. Open a channel. On the bridge of the Remembrance of Ruin, Admiral Voss watched the star map update. Yes, Admiral. Council response? Transmission incoming from Astra Prime. Put it through. The holographic projection appeared above the command deck. Dozens of alien figures filled the display. Representatives of the Galactic Accord Council. They stared at Voss with expressions ranging from disbelief to open hostility. The chairwoman spoke first. You claim to represent humanity. I do. Our historical records state that humanity was exterminated during the pacification campaign. Yes. And you dispute that conclusion. I do. The chairwoman leaned forward. Then explain. Voss studied the council chamber quietly. So many species. So many governments. And every one of them had built their political order on the idea that humanity was gone forever. Yes, Admiral. Prepare archive package Alpha. Transmission ready. Voss looked back at the council. You believe humanity was destroyed in a defensive war. That is the historical record. Then your historical record is incomplete. She gestured to the display. Receiving data now. Inside the council chamber, technicians suddenly scrambled. Massive streams of encrypted information began flooding their systems. Battle recordings. Strategic planning documents. Military logs. Council communications. The chairwoman frowned. What is this? Evidence. A technician's voice trembled slightly. Council, these files appear to be authentic. Another council member leaned forward. Authentic how? Encrypted with early Accord command protocols. The technician swallowed. Protocols only senior military leadership would have had access to. The projection screen filled with historical footage. Star systems burning. Orbital bombardments. Coalition fleets surrounding Terran worlds. One recording showed a council meeting from 8 centuries earlier. A voice echoed through the chamber. Human expansion cannot be allowed to continue. They are too adaptable. They reproduce too quickly. They refuse to accept authority. Another voice spoke coldly. Then we must ensure they cannot threaten us again. The recording paused. The council chamber erupted into shouting. That recording is fabricated. Impossible. Those encryption seals are real. Another technician looked up from his console. There's more. The display changed again. New footage appeared. Planetary evacuation attempts. Civilian ships being destroyed as they tried to escape collapsing human systems. Strategic orders labeled Total Erasure Protocol. The room went silent. Voss spoke quietly. You called it the pacification campaign. She paused. We called it genocide. The council members stared at the projections. Hundreds of files continued streaming into their systems. Evidence that could not easily be dismissed. Evidence recorded by their own governments. One counselor finally whispered, "Why keep this?" Voss answered, "Because humanity knew we might not survive the war." So you preserved proof? Yes. The chairwoman looked at the massive Terran ship on the display. You hid. Voss shook her head. No. We waited. The council chamber was completely silent now. And now you've returned, the chairwoman said slowly. Yes. What do you intend to do? Voss looked at the star map again. Thousands of systems. Billions of people. An entire galaxy that had rewritten its history. We intend to rebuild, she said. Another council member spoke sharply. You expect us to simply accept the return of a civilization we fought a war to destroy? Voss considered that question. No, she said. I expect resistance. The council stared at her. But the truth is already spreading, she continued. The technicians in the chamber confirmed it immediately. The archive files were no longer contained within the council network. They were moving outward. Through trade channels. Civilian networks. News systems. Military intelligence grids. Across the entire galaxy. One counselor whispered in horror. You broadcast it. Yes. Every government will see this. That was the intention. The chairwoman stared at Voss. You're destabilizing the entire Accord. Voss's expression remained calm. No. The Accord destabilized itself 8 centuries ago. She paused. Humanity is simply reminding you. On the command deck of the Remembrance of Ruin, the officers watched the council chamber descend into chaos. Arguments erupted across the projection. Some members demanded the evidence be suppressed. Others demanded immediate investigation. A few simply stared at the historical recordings in stunned silence. Voss said quietly. Yes, Admiral. Status of the fleet response. Multiple Accord military formations moving toward our position. How many? Estimated 4,000 ships. The bridge crew went silent. Voss nodded once. Expected. She looked back at the projection. The council chamber was still arguing. You asked what humanity intends to do, she said. Yes. Voss folded her hands behind her back. We intend to survive. The projection cut. Outside the ship, the stars remained calm. But across the galaxy, the truth humanity had carried for 8 centuries was finally loose. The Accord did not debate for long. Within hours of the archive release, panic spread through the highest levels of government across dozens of species. Entire ministries locked down their communication networks. Military commands activated emergency protocols. Intelligence agencies scrambled to contain the historical evidence now spreading uncontrollably through civilian systems. But the truth was already loose. And the Accord had only one instinct left. 3 major fleet groups were ordered into the Varith expanse. They did not arrive together. They arrived as a wall. The first wave dropped from hyperspace 40 minutes after the council broadcast collapsed into chaos. 1,000 ships, cruisers, destroyers, carrier vessels, and heavy bombardment platforms arranged in a massive coordinated formation. Then another fleet appeared. And another. By the time the final group arrived, the combined Accord armada filled the surrounding space with more than 4,000 warships. From the bridge of the Remembrance of Ruin, the view looked almost beautiful. A sea of lights spreading across the darkness. Officer Commander Hale studied the tactical display. They're forming a blockade. Voss stood beside the command console watching quietly. Yes. They're trying to trap us. Yes. Hale zoomed the sensor feed outward. They're keeping distance. Smart. Across the void, the Accord fleet held position. Thousands of weapon systems slowly locked onto the Terran ship. For several minutes neither side moved. Then the transmission arrived. This is High Marshal Redhan Var of the Galactic Accord Combined Fleet. The voice carried the tone of someone trying very hard to remain calm. Admiral Voss. Voss stepped closer to the console. Yes. You have caused significant political damage to the Accord. That was not my intention. Nevertheless, it has occurred. Var paused. You are currently surrounded by 4,000 Accord vessels. Voss glanced briefly at the tactical display. Confirmed. You will power down your ship and prepare to be taken into custody. Voss tilted her head slightly. Marshal Varius. Yes. Before we continue, I want to clarify something. Go ahead. You assembled 4,000 ships because of one Terran vessel. Var hesitated. That vessel has already demonstrated dangerous capabilities. Yes. Which means you understand the situation. Var's voice hardened. I understand that humanity is extinct. Voss smiled faintly. Then I'm afraid you misunderstood my message. On the Accord flagship, the Marshal frowned. What message? Voss looked at the sensor display. Yes, Admiral. Begin Phase 2. Across the enormous hull of the Remembrance of Ruin, hundreds of armored plates shifted open. Weapon ports extended outward in long mechanical arcs. But the most important systems were not on the surface. They were hidden, deep inside the ship's central spine. Yes. Release drones. The hull beneath the vessel split open. Thousands of small metallic objects streamed outward into space like a cloud of silver insects. On the Accord flagship, alarms exploded across the tactical bridge. Unknown contacts. How many? Counting. The officer's voice faltered. 20,000. Marshal Var stared at the display. What are they? The answer came a moment later. They're weapons platforms. In seconds the swarms spread outward, surrounding the massive Accord fleet formation. The platforms moved into position with machine precision, forming a vast sphere around the Terran vessel. Var leaned forward. Impossible. The swarms stopped moving. 20,000 autonomous defense units now floated across the battlefield. Every one of them armed. Every one of them targeting an Accord warship. Voss spoke calmly into the open channel. You brought 4,000 ships. She paused. We brought the rest of the fleet. Marshal Var felt the bridge grow very quiet. You're bluffing. Am I? Var stared at the sensor data. Every reading confirmed the same thing. The swarm was real, and it was armed with weapons far more advanced than the Accord fleet systems. Voss continued. You should understand something about Terran strategy. Var said nothing. We did not build survival ships, she said. We built return fleets. Var whispered. How many more are there? Voss answered simply. Enough. The Accord fleet hesitated. Thousands of ships waiting for an order. Var clenched his jaw. If you fire on us, this becomes war. Voss nodded slightly. Yes. And we will win. Silence filled the channel. Finally Var spoke again. You're outnumbered. Incorrect. You're alone. No. Voss looked at the sensor screen again. Several distant signals had just appeared. 3 new contacts emerging from hyperspace. Then 5 more. Then 12. Ancient Terran ships began arriving one by one, dropping out of FTL across the outer edge of the battlefield. Var stared at the growing cluster of vessels. More relic ships. Yes. How many survived? Voss answered quietly. Enough to rebuild a civilization. The Accord fleet stopped advancing. 4,000 ships suddenly faced an enemy that was no longer just a single vessel, but a returning species. Var slowly leaned back in his command chair. He understood the situation now. The war 8 centuries ago had not ended with extinction. It had ended with preparation. And the consequences had finally arrived. Voss's voice returned to the channel. Marshal Varius. Yes. You can still leave. The Accord fleet hung silently in space. Thousands of ships. Thousands of weapons. Facing a civilization that had waited 800 years to come back. Var closed his eyes briefly. Then he gave the order. All ships. He exhaled slowly. Stand down. Across the massive battlefield, Accord weapons powered down one by one. The war that had ended 8 centuries ago had finally reached its conclusion. And humanity had returned to finish the story. For several minutes after the Accord fleet powered down its weapons, no one moved. 4,000 warships hung in the darkness of the Varith expanse, their weapon systems silent, their targeting locks disengaged. Across the battlefield, the Terran defense swarm floated calmly in position. 20,000 autonomous platforms. Every one of them still aimed at an Accord ship. Admiral Sarif Voss watched the tactical display without speaking. Commander Hale stood beside her. They're withdrawing targeting locks. Yes. They're actually standing down. Yes. Hale exhaled slowly. 8 centuries of waiting had ended in less than a day. The channel opened again. Marshal Redhan Var appeared on the command display. His posture had changed. The certainty from earlier was gone. Admiral Voss. Yes. The Accord fleet will withdraw. Voss nodded once. That is the correct decision. Var hesitated. Your archive broadcast has already spread across most of the core systems. I expected that. The political consequences will be severe. Voss did not look surprised. History tends to react badly when it learns it was built on a lie. Var leaned forward slightly. What do you want from us? The question hung in the air. For 800 years, the answer might have been revenge. Billions of dead worlds. Entire civilizations erased. But Voss had not waited 8 centuries for revenge. She answered calmly. Recognition. Var frowned. Of what? The truth. Voss gestured toward the star map. Humanity was not defeated in a war. We were targeted for extermination. Var said nothing. The Accord will acknowledge that, Voss continued. You will open the historical archives. You will allow independent investigation of the genocide. And you will recognize the sovereignty of any surviving Terran settlements. The Marshal listened quietly. That will collapse half the current political order. Yes. Several major species will lose legitimacy. Yes. Var leaned back in his chair. You're asking us to dismantle the foundation of the modern Accord. Voss looked at the stars outside the observation window. No. She spoke quietly. I'm asking you to rebuild it honestly. The channel remained silent for a long moment. Finally Var nodded slowly. I will bring the proposal before the council. You will? And if they refuse? Voss turned back toward the tactical display. The Terran platforms glowed faintly around the battlefield. You saw what one Terran ship can do. Var swallowed. Yes. There are more, Voss said calmly. The Marshal nodded once. I understand. The transmission ended. Over the following weeks, the galaxy changed faster than it had in centuries. The archive files continued spreading across every communication network. Civilian historians confirmed their authenticity. Military analysts verified the battle records. Journalists uncovered long-buried political decisions hidden in sealed government databases. The truth was impossible to contain. Across dozens of worlds, protests erupted. Some species demanded accountability. Others tried to suppress the revelations. Several governments collapsed within months. The Galactic Accord Council was forced to open a formal investigation into the events of 8 centuries earlier. And at the center of it all, humanity was no longer a myth. 3 months later, the first Terran colony ships launched. They were not military vessels. They carried engineers, farmers, teachers, families. The surviving humans from the Remembrance of Ruin were not enough to rebuild a civilization alone. But they were enough to begin. Dozens of star systems once belonging to the Terran Republic were returned under temporary Accord protection while reconstruction began. Several younger species offered aid openly. Others simply stepped aside. No one wanted to test the Terran fleet again. Late one evening, Admiral Voss stood alone on the observation deck of the Remembrance of Ruin. The ship orbited a quiet yellow star. Below them, construction platforms surrounded a blue-green world that had once been a Terran colony. Lights from orbital habitats glittered across the darkness. Humanity's first restored settlement. Voss folded her hands behind her back. Yes, Admiral. Status of the reconstruction fleet. 32 colony vessels operational, the AI replied. Additional sleeper ships detected entering Terran space. Voss smiled faintly. How many? Unknown. But more are waking. She nodded slowly. 800 years ago humanity had hidden its survivors across dozens of deep space anchor points. They had not known how many would survive. Now the signals were returning. One by one. Ships waking. Colonies emerging. People coming home. Yes. Open a general broadcast. Channel ready. Voss looked out across the stars. When she spoke, her voice carried across every Terran vessel now scattered across the rebuilding frontier. This is Admiral Sarif Voss. 8 centuries ago our people were nearly erased. She paused. But extinction requires silence. Her eyes moved across the new colony lights below. And humanity has never been very quiet. She smiled slightly. We are not ghosts. We are not relics. We are not history. Her voice remained calm. But the message carried across every human ship listening. We are a civilization. And tonight, she watched the first sunrise break across the restored colony world. We begin again.